Okay, I'm Dan Manning, and it's March the 5th, 2013. We're talking to Marilyn Smith and Carol Coble inside of a building on the east side of Fairgrove Square called Somewhere in Time, and it's owned by Tammy Batson at this time, and it was built about 1920 by Barnes and Copeland as a general store. We're going to be talking to these ladies today, and I just said their names, but they grew up in Fairgrove during the 40s and 50s and 60s as the Thomas girls, and their parents were
Joe Thomas and Irene Owen Thomas.
And you gals were born when? I'll give you the first pick.
I was born May the 31st of 1936.
And you were born?
December of 1944.
And the real interesting part of this is right between the time that Carol Ann was born and Marilyn was born, Fairgrove was making changes, and a lot of things were different from the time she was a little girl and from the time Marilyn was a little girl. And about in there sometime, there was a farming tradition in Fairgrove that had gone back to the 1830s. But more people started working in Springfield at that time. And even though they still did some farming out here, they subsidized what they made on the farm with a job in town. And at about the same time that when Marilyn started coming along, then more women began working. Some in Fairgrove stores, and of course there'd always been some clerks in Fairgrove stores, but there were opportunities for women and during the 60s and the 70s that weren't going on when you were a child. Do you remember what you did as a child growing up? I'm going to ask Carol Ann first because things were just a little bit different then, and I'd like to hear about like a day on the farm when you were a kid. And I think you considered, even though you were right on the edge of Fairgrove, you considered yourself farm kids more than city kids, because there was even though you were just a mile outside of the main square, all of the business in town, except for maybe the gas stations, was right up here on the square at that time, I think. But a little bit about what happened on the farm when you were a kid. Even just start with breakfast. Did you get up pretty early?
Breakfast, we got up early, and all the kids that was old enough, you started milking cows when you was about 5 years old by hand. And you did that first, then you came in for breakfast. And then there was all kinds of chores you could do after that, all the way from feeding chickens, gathering eggs, picking up rocks. We picked up lots of rocks. And then of course you had the noon meal, and we raised chickens and hogs and beef and a large garden, big as probably a big football field. And we spent many a day in the summer pulling weeds out of the garden. One time,
there's no end to it.
One time Mom offered us a penny a piece to pull weeds out of that road, like I say, that went as far as a football field.
She could go broke.
And when she went back out to check to see how many weeds we'd pulled and how well we had done, she found out we had pulled up everything, not just the weeds.
There's not much money in pulling up the plants.
No.
Which she wasn't very hard on you kids, was she?
Mom was great. She was the most wonderful mother anyone could ever have.
She just played right along with you.
Yes, she did. She really did.
She was a fun-loving gal.
And in the afternoon, then after the chores were, whether it was putting up hay or throwing, we used to call it throwing the loose hay down through the horse holes, we call them.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we'd get a little too much loose hay piled up on top of that hole, and we'd get up on top and go stomping, and then when the hay and us too went through the hole. Of course, landed on the hay, it was just all fun. And then we'd milk cows again that evening and come in after the chores that night and have a bite to eat. And we usually played a game of pinochle or old maid or Chinese checkers or just regular checkers or...
Was the radio going in the background or
No,
just special times for the radio?
Just special times for the radio. I got hooked in on Lemon Abner and some of those continued 15-minute programs that I really liked as a child.
Comedy program.
Mm-hmm. And Lux Theater, that was a big thing for all of us. We milked early so we could get in and got to listen to Lux Theater. And they had good stories. I wonder sometimes now, we could imagine all that stuff, I guess as Tim used to say, in my mind's eye, we could see all this stuff going on that we'd have to look at a television now to...
Yeah, it's interpreting the whole thing for us, but our imagination could be used in those days. I know later on, then you had a radio out in the barn. This is maybe after you left home, I don't know, but Jerry said you listened to Hillbilly Heartbeats. Was that the gal? May Kennedy McCord, maybe, is that her name? He said he remembered listening to her. But that might have been after you left home, I'm not sure.
No, we had a great big console radio that Jimmy put out on the front porch of the overhang over the front porch. And we turned it up just as loud as it could go, and it was really a good radio. You could hear it. The claim they could hear it over here down, I wouldn't doubt that.
Well, nothing much was going on in Fairgrove. I know Jerry said at night, if they go out on the porch and they'd hear somebody anywhere in town, a pickup could start up or a car, and they'd know who it was, and they could hear exactly where they went. There was not much going on, no really traffic at night.
And a lot of times in the summertime, it was so peaceful just to take a blanket out and put it in your yard and either sit or lay and look at the stars.
And just tell stories, maybe?
Yeah, and watch the lightning bugs and the crickets sing. And once in a while you'd see a bat go across.
That was a thrill. There was a bat.
Well, we were afraid of it. We had been told that if a bat gets in your hair, that would get all tangled up. Now, I think that was a whole wives' tale.
Just to stay away from bats.
Yeah, so we thought this was stay away from them.
Well, now we're talking about Let's go ahead and talk about your brothers. You had an older brother and two younger brothers.
Joanne was the oldest, and he was as he used to tell, there was times he'd say that he was 3 years older than I was because his birthday was in March and mine wasn't until May. And that would just aggravate me to death. And I'd say, it's just 2 years. He'd say, no, I'm 3 years older than you are.
Just to aggravate you.
And then I was 4 years old when Jerry was born. And Jimmy followed 2 years later, and then Marilyn followed 2 years after that.
Were they all born in the same house? Or did you have a doctor come in?
Joanne and I were born just a mile north in the old Joseph Thomas farm. And
Where Daisy
Thomas,
okay.
where Daisy lives now. And I was born there. And then when I was a year old, we moved to the farm out here in Eastern Fairgrove.
Well, Jerry was born there at that house, wasn't he? And then Jenny and I were born in the hospital.
But like a doctor would come in the house and help with the birth?
Yeah. We didn't know then that there was even a baby on the way. We were so innocent then that we didn't.
That was a big surprise the next day.
Yes. They had sent Joanne and I over to my great-grandma, Addie Thomas's, to spend the night because I knew Sherry was coming. And so they had us come back down the next morning to see the new baby. And he was laying there in the bed with Mom. I looked in at him. I said, I'm ready to go back.
Well, tell that story about maybe you had a chance to trade Jerry off.
Yeah, when he was just about, I see him once, he'd been about 9 months old probably. And everybody gathered at Bell's in the Leeds Goods store down from Main Street there in Fairgrove. And Olita said, told me that she would trade me that big grocery store for Jerry.